Welcome, gang. Glad you're here with us for the Talk Radio program. Going to be a short little episode today. I want to talk directly to Steve Deace about a question that he's running from like a chicken with his head cut off. He is scared to death and will not answer this question. Running like a little schoolgirl, a little 5-year-old schoolgirl from a poltergeist. He will not touch this question with a 10-foot pole. Neither will any of his staff. He can't. If he touches this at all, in any way, if he answers it in any way, he's going to disassemble his entire ministry. He's going to disassemble all of his integrity, and he can't touch it. And ironically, by not answering it, he's already doing that. Before we do that, I want to cover one little issue of housekeeping. It's on a separate issue. I'm going to take about 10 seconds here to do this little bit of housekeeping. You've asked this question about abortion, Steve, and I want to answer it. Now, this video isn't about abortion. It's about something different. It has to do with COVID, but I'll come back to that in just a moment, and that's what this video will be about. But temporarily, I want to divert to one quick question you've been asking because it's a great question, but I think it's a very deceptive question because I think you know the answer, and if you don't, something's definitely wrong, and your brain's a little broken. So you've been asking the question, how is it that all of you can be so angry at me for being willing to support Trump, but not Ron DeSantis? He's just your golden boy. You just love him so much. No, Steve, that's not the answer. I think you know the answer to the question. It's very simple. The reason why Ron DeSantis can actually push for Trump and you can't is because he can do it and keep his integrity and you can't. Why? Well, the reason is what you've been ignoring to be able to ask that question, which is why the question to begin with is deceptive, because it starts on a bad premise that you and DeSantis are kind of on equal footing there. You're not. DeSantis hasn't had a talk show for decades where he's talked about abortion the way that you have and set certain standards for what he can and cannot do. You have. It is impossible for you to vote for Donald Trump and keep your integrity. Not so with Ron DeSantis. So I just wanted to quickly and briefly address that issue of housekeeping. All right, that'll be a separate video coming up here shortly. But for now, let's get back to the subject of this video, which is what is the one question Steve Deace and company, Todd Erzin, Aaron McIntyre, and certainly Steve Deace at the center of this, cannot ever answer, because if he does, he's going to have to either stop supporting Trump or admit that he was wrong to do so to begin with. So to be able to understand the basis for the claim that I'm making, there's a couple of things that you got to hear first. Let me just play a couple of quick clips from Steve himself so you understand where the question's coming from.
And when you consider these didn't save any lives.
Talking about the vaccines.
They didn't do anything. They don't stop the spread. They don't do anything. They literally do nothing. On the positive end, nothing. This is one of the worst crimes against humanity, Operation Warp Speed, in the history of humanity, and the suffering is ongoing. I can't speak for everybody else. I'm only responsible for this little corner of the world 2 hours a day. But I want to make it patently clear, if it wasn't already, I'm never moving on from this, ever. Until there are heads.
No, Steve, you've already moved on. Just by voting for Trump, you've already moved on. Okay, you called it crimes against humanity, right? Which I totally agree with. But there are those. That's a dog whistle for a certain set of standards, and it's a very correct dog whistle. You are correct. They are, and it was crimes against humanity, without question. You are not wrong on that. I completely agree with you. But if you're going to dog whistle crimes against humanity, you got to take all of the accoutrements with it, all the things that are supposed to happen with it. For instance, what is supposed to happen to people who commit crimes against humanity? Well, I would tell you, but you don't need me to tell you because you have already told everyone what should be done with people like this. Let's take a listen to your words. Tell me, Steve.
I want to literally see everybody in those videos just put on trial for their lives.
Oh, really?
Everybody.
Everybody. He left nobody out. He said everybody. Y'all heard, you heard him, right? Everybody. I want to see everybody who committed these crimes against humanity on trial for their lives. And Steve, I got to tell you, I agree with you. Well, who is in that class of everybody? Who belongs in the group of people who committed the crimes? Because whoever is in that group, according to Steve Deace, he wants them on trial for their lives. Take a listen.
We're going through a primary where a bunch of people are tweeting out no amnesty for who did this to us during COVID. And then in the very next tweet.
And in the very next tweet, he says, they say, vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to continue to play that in just a moment because he finishes that thought. I'm stopping to make sure people understand what he's saying right here. Steve is saying, and this was during the primary, he did not understand people who were saying, I want justice for those who have been vaccine injured. I want justice, and I want people on trial for their lives for crimes against humanity. Vote for Donald Trump. He called them out for saying that. By his own definition, Trump is not someone you can vote for and keep your integrity. You can't say, I want justice, and then say vote for Trump.
We're going through a primary where people are saying I was vaccine injured. And then right after that, Donald Trump, who gave me the vaccine that injured me, for president.
Okay, so he not only identifies, because I said, who is in that class of people in the everyone? He identified specifically Donald Trump. You can't say you are for Donald Trump and have any integrity if you're saying, I want people on trial for their lives who did this. Those are his words. He then says, and specifically, he quotes people saying, how can you vote for someone who you know vaccine injured you with any level of conscience, with any level of integrity? How can you say, he's calling them out, how can you say Trump for president when you specifically, and he specifically calls out those who are vaccine injured and says, you can't do that. You have no integrity, essentially is what he's implying. He then goes on to say this.
Which is why, until this primary ends, I'm going to keep pointing these things out. Because they're true. No. And frankly, they're why we're having a primary at all. Or this primary. If Trump had not made these mistakes, he'd be president now. And we'd be having a completely different primary this year. He'd be wrapping up his second term. But he's not. And the country is literally controlled by demonic-inspired domestic terrorists because of the mistakes that he made here. And he remains unrepentant.
Okay, so he tells you these are crimes against humanity. He tells you that everybody that committed these crimes against humanity should be on trial. He tells you that those trials, if the person is convicted, should end in their lives ending. They should be executed for these things. He tells you that Trump is responsible for it. He calls out people that are willing to vote for Trump after having been vaccine injured. He identifies Trump as part of that group of people, and if he didn't, he certainly should have. Take a listen to this.
Because nothing's really changing or doing anything differently, despite all the Rubicons we've apparently crossed.
Well, we were all under house arrest 4 years ago, so
that's
we're used to it.
Yes. And if we're being brutally honest.
So, wait, what were you going to say there? That might have been interesting.
One of the reasons why.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
that's one of the reasons why he's in this position right now, is that he went along with that.
But it's all going to happen because it doesn't feel like a big deal to people. We're comfortably numb.
Yeah, it's exactly correct, Todd. And I wish you still had that position. You claim you do, but you don't. And it's unbelievable to me that of all the people there, I mean, Steve Deace is on the record repeatedly accusing Trump of causing all these problems. It's not just what I've played for you here. There's just oodles and oodles of examples of him doing that. But Todd, man, the original, the goat of anti-vaxxers is voting for Donald Trump. And don't say you're not. You know you are. You've tried to play that card back and forth in the last couple of months. Am I not? I'm not sure. I'm gonna. You're voting for Trump. We all know you're voting for Trump, so don't pretend like you're not. Unbelievable that you guys could say these things, which begs the question that I began shooting this video to ask. You've said on more than one occasion, Steve, that COVID is why God put you in the position that he put you in. You wrote an article on The Blaze saying it's the most important work you have ever done, ever will do. You have said on your program that you're like a watchman on the wall with this COVID stuff. So here's the question, Steve. If COVID involved crimes against humanity, and if all those, according to you, who committed those crimes should be on trial for their lives, and according to you, Donald Trump is in that group of all those, should Donald Trump be on trial for his life? I want that question answered, Steve. Not that you ever will, because you can't. There are only three possible answers to that question. The first possible answer is yes. But to say yes to that, to say yes, Donald Trump should be on trial for his life, is to admit right from your own mouth that you have violated your own conscience in voting for him. But if you say no, does that mean you lied when you said everybody should be on trial for their lives for it? Or were you lying to us? Was it just sort of perfunctory stuff for ratings and clicks for those that believed in that sort of thing? So if you say yes, you got a real conscience problem and you can't vote for Trump. You see, this is my point about the abortion thing with Ron DeSantis. You have put yourself in a different position than everybody else voting for Trump. Not just in the abortion stuff, but especially, most specifically, in the COVID stuff. Now, I know you've already voted, Steve. You put that on the air last week that you're going to be at the Blaze this week, and so you pre-voted, and that's fine. I realize we're not changing your vote. What I'm looking to do is see if I can get you to admit you were wrong in casting the vote that way. Not because Trump can't be voted for, but because you can't vote for him. Now, there's another there's I said 2 or 3. There's 4 possible answers to that question. Answer number 1 is yes, that Trump should be on trial for his life, which means you can't vote for him. Answer number 2 is no, he shouldn't be on trial for his life. And if you think the answer is yes, and you can vote for him, there are much bigger problems here that can possibly be addressed. You are not who you claim to be. You are definitely a wolf in sheep's clothing. If you claim the answer is no, then you're in a position where you lied or deceived us when you told us that they should be on trial for their lives. You didn't mean it at the very least, in sort of the best possible interpretation. Answer number 3 is, well, wait a second, Ray, and you've tried to sort of shoehorn this response in, never specifically to this question, but you've shoehorned it throughout some broadcasts, and it's clearly meant to sort of make its way into the sort of oikos, into the ethos of those listening, so it's sort of in the back of their head. I know what you're doing, so that way when they come up with this question, you have sort of already answered it, which is Trump has already paid a huge price. He's been shot at, or was shot at once, almost shot at a second time, had his ear grazed, they made attempts on his life, he's lost his fortune, everything he ever did. You talk about all these penalties that he's paid for running for president. Yes, Steve, those are penalties that he's paid for running for president. They are not penalties for what he did as president. They are not sufficient because even if you could say, no, those also involve what he did as president, it doesn't meet the standard that you set, that the standard is that first they have to be tried, and he has not, and if convicted, executed. Those are your standards. And I agree with them. The 4th possible is silence, which is what you're doing right now. You have misled the world, Steve. You have, in the last couple of weeks, once again said, well, give us some grace. We're going to have differences of conscience. No, Steve, we don't have a problem with difference of conscience. We have a difference with you pretending you have a specific conscience and you don't. It's totally okay, Steve, for you not to believe the things you say you believe, as long as you don't say you believe them. But if you say you believe them, you got to live them, or you're a hypocrite. You're at best wobbling your way into heaven with lies, or not going there at all. Now, I'm not judging either one on that. That's between you and God. I'm just saying, might be putting your soul in a little bit of danger here if you're not actually living the things you say you believe about God. That's between you and God. My only question is, please answer this, Steve. Should Trump be put on trial for his life or not? You say you want grace? You got it. You've been asking for it lately. So I'll give it to you, Steve. But I'll give it to you the way God gives it to you. God gives grace to the humble. That means they admit where they were wrong and they make it right. No, Steve, you don't automatically get grace just because you're a Christian. Matter of fact, the Bible specifically talks about, and you have referenced this on your show, for those who practice the type of things that you're practicing now, they should be put out when they're causing these types of divisions in the church. And that's what you are doing. You are dividing the church. And then when people ask you questions about this on your show, you actually call them stupid and you call them grifters and you say, you're just, and you just dismiss them. It's unbelievable how you treat Christians when they try to call you out. You want to call people out, but you don't want to be called out. So Steve, admit you are wrong. Turn from the wickedness that is your current position. Because God will lavish grace upon you and grace upon me, and you can expect grace from us when you own where you're wrong. So, Steve, I put the question to you one final time. Please answer this question publicly on your show. Should Donald Trump be put on trial for his life? And if so, should he be executed if found guilty? Please, you and Todd and Aaron, all 3 of you need to answer that question.